Let's talk about this even further with national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you here. You heard there from Netanyahu. Do you anticipate or envision Israeli troops in Syria at all in the near term or no?
Andrew, as far as I can tell, Israeli troops are in Syria. In fact, there's a report that there might be some units only 15 miles south of Damascus. They've been moving up. There's not a big invasion per se, but they are securing that border area between Syria and Israel. They've moved north of the Golan Heights, and some of this is really the way it's described. It's securing basically the border area with Israel. Of course, they're also very concerned about this HTS group, and the fear is that they've rolled in there, and even though you have these massive strikes taking out various weapon systems, they've rolled in. They've inherited all the tanks the Syrian army have, all their mortars or artillery, everything else. So there is a significant concern that they could become a very well-armed rebel force, much greater than they are now, and that's why Israel's taking these proactive actions. And I was rather surprised I found out they were actually so close to Damascus.
Yeah, so Hal, Israel also acknowledged that its troops were pushing into this buffer zone inside Syria, just to what you alluded to, which was established after the 1973 Mideast War. However, Israel denied that its forces were advancing toward Damascus, but close to Damascus, to your point here. What should Israel be concerned about with the new environment in Syria? You heard there from Netanyahu essentially saying they do not want it to become yet another transport route, buffer zone for Iran to wield its axis of terror against Israel again. And you heard him say that they will do everything to prevent that possibility.
Well, they want to stop it from being a transit conduit, if you will. They don't want it to become part of the Levant, the Shiite Crescent. They don't want to see it as a track for more weapons and armaments going over to Hezbollah. So they want to stop that. But the other thing, too, is what they're really concerned about are certain weapon systems that basically this HTS group has inherited from the Syrians. So they've been taking very proactive strikes. I've heard very recent reports there might be close to 500 Israeli strikes have taken place throughout Syria. And if you look at the map, they're literally all over Syria. I mean, sure, there's a lot around Damascus and stuff, but you see stuff way off in the northeast. And basically, they're looking at chemical weapons. That's a huge concern. Any weapons of mass destruction, to including biological weapons. But they're also looking at things like anti-ship missiles and air defense missiles. They've gone in and taken out aircraft left and right. I don't know if there is a serviceable military aircraft left in Syria right now. They've been hitting everything out there to take them out while they're on the tarmac. And basically, it's to prevent them falling into the hands of whom they see, and of course, according to the U.S. designation, we see as well as terrorist groups.
Yeah, Hal, let's talk about the United States now. Today, they said it would recognize and support a new Syrian government that renounces terrorism, destroys chemical weapons stocks, and protects the rights of minorities and women here. This is the statement from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who we just reported is going to Turkey, the region, later this week. I want to read the second paragraph. He says the transition process and new government must also uphold clear commitments to fully respect the rights of minorities, facilitate the flow of humanitarian assistance to all in need, prevent Syria from being used as a base for terrorism or posing a threat to its neighbors, and ensure that any chemical or biological weapons stockpiles are secured and safely destroyed. That's a tall order for the new rebels in charge in Damascus, right, Hal?
Oh, yeah, Andrew, that's a huge order. And it's almost an aspirational document. When you look at it, you go, that's great. How do you plan to make something like that happen is the big question. Right now, some of them, they were originally, Jelani was kind of saying, hey, we're not going to cause or force women to cover up, wear a hijab, and we're not going to do all these other things. And then today, some of their members of their government, if you will, were saying it's going to be kind of like a Taliban-style government that they're putting in place, which would definitely fit their ideology. Bottom line is they're Islamic extremists. And if you have Islamic extremists in charge, you should expect that you're going to see some of the more extreme versions of what they think is the way things are supposed to govern happen. So you're going to see things like you see in Afghanistan. I'm not saying you're going to see all the things you see in Afghanistan, but you're going to see things like that. This group has more in common with ISIS than they have with any concept of a non-sectarian democratic state. So it's very unlikely they're going to move that way. The U.S. and Israel both are looking at this and saying, "Hey, look, you got a lot of unsecured weapons. You got ISIS operating more freely. This is an opportunity," and that's actually the way U.S. Central Command looked at it. It's an opportunity to do some strikes on ISIS that we probably want to do for a long time against certain targets before those targets move, to go out there and hit them. And we've been hitting them hard the last couple of days. We've been hitting them hard. And of course, the Israelis have been hitting all their targets very hard as well. And I'm not hearing that anything's letting up. I'm hearing that they're going to keep prosecuting these targets until they feel they've basically destroyed what they can or what they need to destroy with what we have to do that.
And Hal, just lastly, you're hearing a lot of talk from Biden and Blinken and others about holding accountable the previous ruler and regime, the Assad family, and I guess it's stewards of oppression here. How would they do that? They're in exile. They've sought political asylum in Russia. Russia has granted that political asylum here. What can we do to still hold the concept of the Assad regime and family accountable for its 50-plus years in rule? What would that look like?
Well, the mechanics of actually having Assad or any members of his family stand trial, in the International Criminal Court or something like that, that sounds a little. It's again, it's kind of aspirational. We're not actually signatories to the International Criminal Court, I should mention, but that's probably not going to happen. They're not going to leave Russia. They're going to stay in Russia. They've got lots of properties here. But that's the essence of it. Properties, assets, bank accounts. That's where there's a possibility. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, other things, the FinCEN network around the world, the Edgemont Group, can look at all the assets, all of the real property, all the bank accounts, everything they can think of tied to the Assad family, and start working on a strategy to seize all of that. Of course, part of it may be getting some sort of criminal conviction in absentia or something like that. But to seize all those assets, that's where they could kind of make a dent. And actually, one of the things that and I don't know if this is exactly the situation, but remember that Russia was cut off of the SWIFT system shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, which means there may be limitations on how the Assad family can actually move money and assets, particularly money, around the world. They may have some great limitations on them, and that may be an opportunity if the U.S. and other governments can act fast enough to go in there and find some way of seizing that. I mean, you saw what we did with the Russians with Ukraine. That was huge. That was like $300 billion worth of assets that were seized. I'm sure they're thinking maybe something like that for the Assad family could be in the works.
Hal, just lastly, I mean, were you surprised that Russia offered the Assad family asylum? I thought Vladimir Putin doesn't like losers, so to speak. We all know how Wagner head Yevgeny Prigozhin ended up after mounting a near coup there in Moscow. Were you surprised by this? Shouldn't Russia be licking its wounds to what transpired in Syria?
Well, they'd already hosted his family. That had already in November at some point, his family moved up there. He had or has large real estate holdings in Russia. They have traveled to Russia. The kids have gone to school. His children have gone to school in Russia. I think as I understand it, they speak Russian. So there's a lot of connections between the Assad family and Russia, a lot of connections between the Assad family and Moscow in particular. And so it's not surprising. The other thing is Putin's looking down the line. He wants to do this because he wants dictators that he's propping up around the world to feel if everything goes bad, we will take you in. We got your back, so to speak. So there is some messaging there as well. Okay. So, he took him in. But the other thing, too, is don't think he's doing it for free. All right. The Assads have a lot of money. And I'm sure Putin's looking at that just as closely as saying, Yeah, there's a tax on your being here. There's a rent charge, if you will. And I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's not cheap.
All right, Hal Kempfer, as always. Great chat there about all the inner workings, and they're complicated in the Middle East. Syria in particular this week. We'll talk soon.
All right. Talk soon, Andrew.